I'm Sydney Driskill, and welcome to my middle school classroom. Today we're going to be talking about integrating literacy and literature-based strategies into the library. So, first of all, what are we talking about when we say literature-based activities? And I would say it's much more than just handing students a novel, even if it's a really awesome novel, and saying, here you go, read this. I think it's doing real life, authentic activities with those books that will bring it to life with the students, and things that they would naturally do, I think is the best. And then giving them support with the activities to help them walk through the novel and pick out the things that are important that we're obviously trying to teach them through standards. And there's lots of different ways that you can do this. There's tons of strategies that I've seen used, with colleagues in the classroom or during my student teaching experiences, or even things that I've used in the classroom myself. But I want to talk about two different things that are my favorite that I would love to do one day when I become a librarian and I step out of the classroom. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what I like to call a book frenzy. It's one of my favorite activities. I participate in it I would participate in it as a teacher, but as a librarian, it would be awesome to implement it. So this is a well-planned, structured event for all the students in the school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and it's led by the librarian primarily, but then supported by the teachers. And so students are going to choose a book from a list that I would give them as a librarian. They're going to choose a book that they are most interested in. I'll give them a copy of the book. They'll take that home and they'll read it on their own time, and then they'll meet in a small group with a teacher on the day of the book frenzy. This is one event that happens, and they'll engage in like a book talk or a book club type meeting. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you how to successfully accomplish a book frenzy within your school as a librarian. And I'm going to do this for you in steps. So step one is to get the teachers involved. You cannot do something like this without the support of the teachers. And so as a librarian, I would be putting together this event, but they are going to have to be willing to help me. They have to volunteer to pick a book that they are going to read themselves, or maybe they've already read it themselves, that they love, that they're excited about, and that they're willing to take part in this book club type setting with students. This does not happen during school hours, it's after school hours, so teachers will hopefully want to volunteer anyways, but then they can also receive some PD hours for doing it. And you don't want them to just be willing to do it and say, yeah, I'll do it, but you want them to be excited so that the kids are excited and engaged in it, and that they have actually read the book and have read it recently so that they can discuss it well. And then they're also going to be responsible for planning fun educational activities, and we'll get to that later. So that's step one. Get your teachers involved and get them excited about it. Step two is to choose some quality books. So me as a librarian, I would compile a list of books that I would want my teachers to choose, and then the students would choose as well. And there has to be a wide selection of novels for the students to choose from because they all have different interests. And I would suggest choosing popular books, but also new books that are just being released. And this sort of ties into our textbook by Bond that talks about our collection and how we need to gather that collection and have different types of books and how important that is. And so if I have put my collection together the correct way, like it talks about in the textbook, then I will have a variety of choices for students to choose from, and it'll be an easy process. And he also talks about in the textbook how you need to make sure that the books they're reading are enjoyable and are high quality and are appropriate. And so those same three things go with the book frenzy as well. You need to make sure the books are books they're going to like, they're really great quality, and that they're appropriate for the age group. So some books that I would definitely put into the book frenzy. First one is The Red Kayak. If you have not read this book, it's super good for middle school students. This is realistic fiction. You're going to want to choose different genres, obviously. This is realistic fiction, kind of a mystery. Anytime I've read this with students, they have loved it, gotten so excited. And there's also a sequel to this book, so definitely put this in the book frenzy, and I'm going to show you an example of how I would use this as a teacher in the book frenzy later on. So The Red Kayak, a popular book for the middle school girls right now is The Selection, very much like The Bachelor for middle schoolers, but this is a dystopian novel, the government taking control of the situation, but it's also got a lot of love stories in it, so this will really capture a lot of the girls in the school that will want to sign up for this book. As far as popular but not necessarily new, you always have to throw in Harry Potter as the fantasy genre. There'll be tons of kids who I'm sure will love to sign up for this. This is one that I, as a teacher, would be very excited about because it's one of my favorite books. So definitely Harry Potter. A newer book, not within the last year, but still a lot of people haven't heard of it, is Seraphina and the Black Cloak. This is by Robert Beatty, who is actually from Kentucky. So that's a cool tie-in for when you talk to him about the book. This is also fantasy, involves a little bit of magic, so really fun and cool activities that you can do with this book, and it's a fairly new book. Also, there's the book Speak. This is realistic fiction, and I would say that this book and also a book like The Hate U Give would have to be primarily for 8th grade students because of the content. And then I would also suggest getting permission from parents before, with like language and different subject matters that younger kids maybe would not need to read. So those are just some of the books that I would definitely be putting in my book frenzy. I think students will be excited about. So you have to choose the right books. That's step 2. Then step 3, you have to create a fun atmosphere. And so whatever space you choose for your book frenzy, whether it's the cafeteria or the gym or the library itself, you want students to walk in and feel like they've entered a literature wonderland. You want it to be exciting. Each table needs to be individually decorated for books, and me as a librarian, that would be my role to decorate, because I'm not going to put a bunch of things, the teachers are supporting, but they're not, I don't want to put a ton of responsibility on them. I want to make it easy for them. So I would decorate the tables for specific books. So obviously the Harry Potter table is going to look different than the Red Kayak table, and I would take part in putting those decorations up. And this might seem like a small thing, but it's so important, because if the students see that a lot of time and effort has been placed into making it look just amazing for them, they're going to be that much more excited and feel like it's just a super cool event to be involved in. And this will also encourage them to have even more in-depth conversation about the book. When they're excited, they're going to want to talk about it, and I just think it creates an overall really great atmosphere. And then aside from the decorations, you're going to have, I as a librarian would provide snacks for students to be able to eat as they talk, as if they're having a real book club, maybe even some coffee, mainly for the teachers because kids don't drink coffee, but still fun atmosphere. And then prizes for the end of the book frenzy, to just say thanks for coming, and we're so glad that you participated in this. And I would like to get prizes that encourage reading. So bookmarks, popular books, things like that. Not just random things, but things that will encourage them to read more. And the last step, super important step in creating a successful book frenzy, is do fun but also educational, standard-based table activities for each book. So once you've met with your group and you've had a snack and you've talked a little bit and you've discussed obviously your favorite parts of the book, then you need to have an activity for the students to do, or the teachers need to have an activity for the students to do. And this needs to be fun for them, but they also need to be learning. And so you can do something that involves the theme of the book or characterization, plot, It's most fun to do something that they can take with them as kind of like a souvenir for the book frenzy. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of that. I mentioned 2 books, and I'll start with The Red Kayak, one of my favorites. So if I were to be in the teacher role and doing The Red Kayak as my book for my table, I would choose an activity based on figurative language because this book is filled with examples of figurative language. So I would probably set up sort of like a matching game at the table where I have cards with names of figurative language, a simile, metaphor, hyperbole, personification, and then on the other half, I would have cards with quotes directly from the book that are perfect examples of these figurative languages, and then they would match them. Simple, but it can be a fun matching game, and they're also learning about figurative language. So that would be my activity for this, and then you can also throw in a craft for later. If your activity doesn't take long, they could create their own kayak, and you could do like a painting, art for the art students. Okay, so that would be for the red kayak, and then for the selection, which we'd probably have mainly a group of girls, maybe some boys, but probably a group of girls for this. I would do a characterization activity. If you haven't read this book, the main character's name is America. She's a very strong female character, and so that's why I think that the girls would like doing that. And I've in my classroom, I've always enjoyed doing an activity where I have kind of like a stick figure cut out of a person, and they write the person's name, and then on the head, the arms, and the feet, they come up with 5 adjectives that describe their character. So for America, they would probably choose things like brave, or strong, powerful, words like that. So they write those on there, and then I ask them to find a direct quote from the book that backs up what they're saying. So you can't just tell me America is brave. You have to prove it to me. Cite your evidence. And then they decorate the cutout to look just like the person, which is fun because they can design her dress or some dress that she wears in the book, and her hair and things like that. They enjoy that. And then an art type craft with this would be making a crown. This is about a monarchy, so making a crown out of pipe cleaners, and then you could always do that first, and you could wear them at the table, and so that everybody knows, your book is about a princess. So 2 examples of activities that you could do if you were a teacher and you were taking part in the book frenzy. So that was one of my ideas for integrating literature-based activities into the library. And I have one more for you that you can also do with the whole school, and this would be a 40-book challenge. Now, I know a lot of teachers who do this within their classroom with just their students, but I think it would be a great activity for an entire school to do as a whole with the librarian leading it up. So the goal of the book challenge is not just for students to read a large number of books quickly. It is to push students out of their comfort zones when it comes to the genres they are reading. I try to do this in my classroom already. Behind me, this is my classroom library, and I have it sectioned off by realistic fiction, and I have 2 rows of that, and then dystopian, fantasy, science fiction. At the bottom, I have historical fiction, and then horror or scary books. And I try to push them to read outside the genres they usually do, but a lot of times they get stuck in a rut, or they even hear words like historical fiction and think that'll be boring, so they don't read those. So this is to push them out of their comfort zone to read different genres of books. And once again, one thing that really plays a big part in this is your library collection. You have to have multiple copies of or multiple examples of books in each genre so that they can choose one that fits them. That goes back to our textbook with finding the right books and in the right formats for your students, because you want everybody to be able to participate. So you might need audiobooks to fit the needs of certain students. So this will last a whole school year, and so if they read a book a week, they can easily accomplish the 40-book challenge, which does seem like a high number, but it is a challenge. And students will be kept accountable by their teachers, their classroom teachers, their reading teachers, by me or you, the librarian, and then their parents at home can be checking in on their progress to make sure they're staying on track. And all three of these people, librarian, teacher, parents, together need to make sure that the book's in the student's reading level. So they get a Lexile level at the beginning of the year based on their MAP scores. They do that at my school. So making sure the book is in their Lexile level, and then it's long enough, so more than 100 pages. And then we can do weekly check-ins with the student. So the steps to complete this challenge. Step 1 for the student is to pick which genre they would like to start with, because they're going to be reading from each genre. So they choose which one they would like to start with, and they'll spend about 15 minutes during the school day, probably in their reading class, reading, and then they have to spend at least 30 minutes at home reading on their own, and that will be for parents to monitor. And then step 2, once they've finished completing the book, they're going to fill out a form, and this is for the teachers and the librarians to be able to tell, have you actually read this book? And it'll have the title, the genre, the number of pages, the author, and then they have to do a brief summary, including what is the lesson learned or the theme of the book. Okay, so they have to be able to tell you some major things about the book so you know they've read it. And they'll continue to compile these papers till the end of the year after they've read all their books. Step 3, as it continues, students will continue reading books and they'll work their way through the different genres. So there's realistic, fantasy, dystopian, science fiction, historical fiction, horror, mystery, and nonfiction. That's 8 genres of books. So they have to read 5 books in each genre to get to their 40 books. So they'll continue. And then the last step comes with the end of the year. And whoever has completed this very difficult challenge, they should receive a really great prize for doing that. So they'll be given a plaque saying that they completed it, and then we'll take them on a trip somewhere that they're going to be excited about, like an amusement park, a full day. This can be after testing, where they just feel like they're being rewarded and set apart for completing this very difficult challenge. And I think that will also motivate them to start it in the first place. So I just gave you 2, I think, really great literature-based strategies that you can do in the library as a librarian to help grow readers and push them out of their comfort zone and make reading fun. And so for your follow-up activity, I would like for you to think about, if you were a teacher at a school where they were doing a book frenzy, what book would you choose and what standard-based activity would you have your students complete at the table? That's what I want you to be thinking about. So thanks for watching. See you later.